Fantastic. And we are live. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're watching this in the world. My name is Quentin Stuckey, otherwise known as Stux. I make videos to do with film, books, psychology, personal development, all that kind of stuff. And welcome to another episode of Novel Conversations. And today I have a very unique and exciting guest. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself for the YouTube viewing audience?
Yeah, my name's Gary Lewis. I'm a local historian based in Leytonstone in the East End of London. I'm 58 years of age. I'm a tour guide and I also do lectures, but predominantly I do tours called Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock. I put a tour together 6 years ago, didn't start doing it till 4 years ago, called Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock. So I live about 5 minutes away from where Alfred Hitchcock was born.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gary. Very excited to have you here. Um, I actually took your tour about a month ago now, I believe. Yeah. And when I
Mm,
was visiting London, I was there over Christmas. And one of the first tours that I wanted to take, it wasn't a Jack the Ripper tour, it wasn't a Sherlock Holmes tour, it wasn't a Harry Potter tour, it was an Alfred Hitchcock tour. And when I Googled Alfred Hitchcock tours in London, your tour was actually the very first one that came up. And I
mm,
knew that yours would be the best because it was more than just Hitchcock filming locations. It was actually where Hitchcock, as a cinematic artist, was born and raised, which I think is very cool. And I think
mm,
that, you and I, and we can obviously get into this, you had mentioned on the tour how much untapped potential there is in the neighborhood of Leytonstone and
mm,
how, there's so many different locations that the community is unaware of that are so unique and specific to Hitchcock. And
mm.
so just to get started on this on our conversation, um I guess you sort of already told us a bit about yourself and what your background is, but I'm curious, when did you first discover the films of Alfred Hitchcock?
I was 14 years old. I remember then, I mean, we only had three channels. You know, this is going back to 1978. So in England, we only had three channels: BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. And they all pretty much finished at midnight. But I remember it was one Sunday night and I was warned not to watch it. You know, the whole family had gone to bed. I read the papers, tonight's Psycho, and I thought, well, I'm not going to bed. I'm going to watch this. And I remember when it got to the shower scene and the music, Bernard Herrmann, yin, yin, I hid behind the sofa. I shook with fear, and that was it. I was hooked. Then I wanted to know more. Over the years, know more and more about Alfred Hitchcock. Not just the films like The Birds, Marnie, Family Plot, North by Northwest. I wanted to know the origins, the Thirst films that were made. As I said on the tour, when I took you round and I showed you that Leytonstone back in Hitch's day had six cinemas, and one of them, the Gaiety, actually showed his first early movies, the black and white, sound without sound movies, like The
Hmm.
Mountain Eagle that was made in Germany, the UFA studios in Berlin. And then he made The Pleasure Garden, again made at the UFA studios in Berlin. And that's where people don't know, that's where he learned to speak fluent German. Alfred Hitchcock could
Hmm.
speak fluent German. He spoke fluent French. Because when he worked at those film studios in Berlin, they didn't speak any English. He didn't speak any German, so he had to learn. And Alfred Hitchcock was very inspired by mainly the Germans. They were cutting edge technology until Hollywood took over. But he was inspired by the Germans, the Americans, the Russians, and of course, the British. And then when I found out about the movie The Lodger, the story of London Fog was based on Jack the Ripper, because Alfred Hitchcock, he was born not far away from where the last victim was buried, Mary Kelly. He was buried 5 minutes away from her. And that's another story I could tell it entirely. And in that graveyard at St. Patrick's, there's the three Alfred Hitchcock family plots. There's 13 members of his family over there, which obviously, I couldn't cover in the tour, but I can talk about it at the end. So yeah, so I've dug deep. He made 63 movies in all. I've seen 41 of them. And as we're speaking now, this afternoon, we taped off of a channel called Talking Pictures Notorious. You know, one of it's a good movie. I like it. Cary
Hmm.
Grant and Ingrid Bergman. you know.
Yeah, that's one
But
of the movies that they have in the National Film Registry. I think they have maybe 8 or 9 Hitchcock movies, and Notorious, I think it was either Notorious or The Birds was the most recent one that was brought into the National Film Registry. Yeah, Notorious is a good one. It's not one of my favorites, but it is. I can appreciate it for what it is. I know people that
yeah,
absolutely love Notorious, but yeah. So
yeah.
have you seen it before, or it's your first time seeing it?
The first time I actually saw it was about 6 years ago when I said, in St. John's Churchyard where they had Hitchcock's home. So for
Hmm.
3 nights, they had 3 Hitchcock movies in the churchyard showing. And the first night they showed Notorious, Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, Claude Rains. And I
Hmm.
think the next night they showed Strangers on a Train, followed by Suspicion. So, I've
Nice.
seen a lot of his movies, but there's more that I haven't seen. So I've seen 41. Obviously, I want to see a few more, but I've you know I'm only 58, and I don't know how many years I got left on this planet. So I think no need to hurry. you
No,
know
you got time. That's right.
I got box
Yeah.
sets to watch, and I just find Alfred Hitchcock, I mean, he's a great film director. There's no doubt about it. But what I wanted to do when I started the tours, and I actually started off as a talk, I wanted to make the world aware that, Alfred Hitchcock is not American. He did become a naturalized American in 1955, but he was born in Leytonstone in 1899. And they tore his greengrocers down. He was the son of a greengrocer, you know. And it's fascinating, all this. I've been, gathering information, you know, uh, that's been coming over the past 7 years. And it's funny, this happened a couple of weeks after he came on my tour. I had a dream one night where I dreamt that Alfred Hitchcock was sitting in my front living room. And I said to my friend, look, he's here, he's here. So there must be something between me and Alfred Hitchcock. We must have a rapport somewhere, I think we have because I live 5 minutes away from where he was born. And the hospital I was born in is the area where his father and his sister and his family lived in the early days in Stratford, you know. So maybe there's a kinship between me and Alfred Hitchcock. I've actually had a phone call from his cousin called Betty Hitchcock last year saying
Mm.
she wants to come on the tour, but she hadn't seen him since the 1950s,
Wow.
So, yeah. So I feel it's exciting times. It's interesting times. I thought I'll take these tours on because nobody else was bothering, you know. And this is a real gold mine around here. Not only Alfred Hitchcock, people like Stuart Freeborn, David Bailey, Damon Albarn, the list, Derek Jacobi, the list is endless of famous people from Leytonstone. But I like to zone in on Alfred Hitchcock.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's he's certainly, I mean, it's very there's like certainly a slew of amazing filmmakers, but he's certainly probably the most influential, especially for what he did to pioneer the suspense and thriller genre that we know today. And especially working in the thriller and suspense genre at that point in time in film history, because for the longest time it wasn't really until Francois Truffaut's book, his interview with him came out in book form, and I think it was 1962. It was just right around the time that he was finishing up The Birds. It wasn't until that book came out that more film critics and film scholars and so forth actually really started to take him seriously and appreciate what he was doing. Because for the longest time he was just kind of seen as, I mean, his films were certainly um, appreciated in their day, but certainly not to the extent that they're appreciated now. He was seen as like he's a great showmanship. He's not like a cinematic artist. But then when you have the new wave of French filmmakers coming out and saying, no, this guy's good. He's really the things he's doing in North American cinema and in British cinema are really unique and poignant, and they deserve attention. That was the
Yes.
moment when it really, really started for him, and it just continues. Like it's passed on generation after generation. Like I'm turning 26 in a few months, and the first Hitchcock film I saw was also on cable TV. It was the Canadian Broadcasting Company, CBC, here in Canada, or I'm in Spain right now, but where I'm from, originally Canada, and it was The Birds. And from then I was hooked. I was completely pulled in to his world and to the way that he was able to tell such a suspenseful, frightening story. So it's absolutely, absolutely incredible. And I find that his films warrant rewatching again and again. Every time, I've seen Psycho probably close to about 100 times, and every time I see it, there's something I didn't really notice before, some sort of subtlety in there. And
Yeah,
so
I
I
mean
think that
the
his,
thing,
yeah.
the
Mhm.
thing that you'll notice with Psycho, and I was only this has only got brought to my attention when I watched the documentary. When Milton Arbogast, the investigator, turns up, have you ever noticed that when he turns up at the Bates Motel, he stops the car, takes the keys out the ignition, and gets out on the rear driver's side?
Yes, I have
Now,
noticed
why
that.
is he? Yeah, and he does it twice when he comes back. And the way that Janet Leigh, I mean, she runs the shower and gets straight underneath it. I mean, even today, I don't get straight underneath a shower, you
Definitely
know.
not.
And all that Hershey's chocolate sauce that was going down, not her legs, but Marley Renfro. He did a lot of things in that, you know. And I always think at the end when Anthony Perkins is smiling away and he's turning into his mother's face, I said, he set this up for a part two, a sequel. And when the sequel came in 1983, you know, Richard Jenkins, I think his name was, the director who took it on, an Australian director.
Richard Franklin,
And
yeah.
it made
Yeah.
like $38 million at the box office, you know,
Yeah.
and the first one took in 10 million. But then Gus Van Sant, you know, against better judgment, was told not to remake Psycho. He did it. He ruined his career. You can't remake classics, you know, you can't
No.
do it. Yeah.
Certainly not shot for shot and with a comedic actor like Vince Vaughn in the role of Norman Bates. I always thought that I'm not a big fan of the remake. I can appreciate it for sort of what it is. I'm a big fan of the Psycho films in general, like even the sequels as well. I think that they're vastly underrated. Certainly not certainly not the same sort of level as the original, but very, very underrated films. I think very good on their own as standalone films. But the remake, I think one of the biggest errors he made was the miscasting, the casting of Vince Vaughn in that role. But that's also an incredibly hard role to cast. I don't know if you've seen the oh, we just seem to have lost Gary. That's okay. Just 1 second. Stand by, YouTube audience.
Okay, fine.
Okay, and we're back. Yeah, so I was just saying that I don't know if you've seen the Bates Motel series at all, the A&E with Freddie Highmore and Vera Farmiga.
No,
I don't know if you checked that out.
no.
I would recommend it, at least for the very last season where they recreate the original Psycho across 10 episodes, but it's certainly not like the Gus Van Sant remake where it's trying to be done shot for shot, where it's trying to be a direct copy of the film. It very much it lives in its own world. I mean, it's set in modern day, but the
Mm,
casting of Freddie Highmore in that role, I thought that he did a lot of justice to the way that Perkins portrayed that character and originated that character. So I thought that Freddie Highmore, of
mm.
all the other people that have played Norman Bates, which there haven't been very many beyond Anthony Perkins, I thought Freddie Highmore was the best. But yeah, so just moving on to, I was wondering what ultimately led. So you mentioned discovering the films of Alfred Hitchcock. It's pretty obvious to fellow film goers, film buffs like us, why he's such an important and influential filmmaker, why he's such a master. But I'm
Mm.
curious, what led you to start conducting a tour of Hitchcock locations in Leytonstone? You touched on this a bit already, but I'm just wondering if you could specifically get into
Well,
that.
this happened about 6 years ago. So I retired from my previous job. I was a train driver in London Underground. You know, I'd done that for 27 years. I had three suicides. The third one kind of like ended my days on there. Then I did my backing. And I thought, I'll take the payment. I'll take the half pension before I carry on with this anymore because it's ruining my health. And so for, I think, the first year I retired, I didn't know what direction I was going to take. And then I kind of got this idea. I was walking down Leytonstone tube station where the murals are, and I saw two women. One was from Snaresbrook, which is local, and then one was from Greece, and they were looking at the mural, I think, to suspicion. And I said, "You seem to be admiring that mural." She said, "Yeah." She says, "What's Alfred Hitchcock got to do with Leytonstone?" I said, "He was born here." She went, "No, he's American." And I thought, so many people think he's American, and they don't know he comes from Leytonstone. So in 2016, I got involved with this local group called the Alfred Hitchcock of Leytonstone Society. And I think it was 2018 that I said, I put a PowerPoint presentation together called Hitchcock's Leytonstone, you know, do it as a talk, you know. And when I felt my back was felt well enough, so it was the Barbican who did a festival called Leytonstone Loves Film. So I went out on my first guided tour. I'd done it, walked around the places. I thought, right, I'm going to start the tube station. I'm going to talk about the murals, you know, and then we're going to talk about the days of the tube station when it was part of the Great Eastern Railway, when it was steam trains, when Alfred Hitchcock used to ride these trains around here. Talk about the cinemas, and then I'm going to work up to Leytonstone's first cinema. The building's still there, you know. And on that first tour, I had 60 people on it. I had 6 people from Mexico, only one spoke English. He translated for the rest. A couple from Romania, 2 ladies from Greece, and a woman from Lyon in France. And so I didn't, get paid for that. I just took the hat off, passed the hat, and people, chucked £5, £10, what, and I think about £60 I walked away with. And I thought we're on to something here. So I did it the next month for donations again. And this time I think I took about £80 off of, a crowd of about 20 people. And also all the time I was seeing people from other countries coming on the tour, France, Italy, and I thought this has got an international appeal. So I did it 4 times as a guided tour for donations. And then in January 2020, I turned it into a business, all was looking well. And then the lockdown came in, and that was like kind of where things, didn't go so well. Last year, this past year has been pretty good. I've had visitors last year, such as yourself from Canada. You were the first Canadian to come on it. I had a couple from New York who loved it, and they said, all these people, and there was a couple of guys from Luxembourg, and this guy called Paul Lesh, he's like one of the leading Hitchcock guys, does a lot of talks on Hitchcock in Europe, and he speaks 4 languages. He speaks French, German, Italian, and English, and he's worked with Terry Gilliam and Ray Liotta, and he came on the tour, and he said, you told me a lot of stuff here I didn't know. And the couple from New York, they said, well, we knew he came from London, but we didn't know where. So I'm uncovering gold here. This is a gold mine to be mined here. Nobody else bothered to do it. There's one other Alfred Hitchcock tour in London, I think, that you saw, Chandra Shelby or something, and she charges like
Hmm.
£140, which I think is a bit excessive. But my price is, what you paid last year have been held over for this coming year. So I thought inflation busting 2023 prices held over from 2022. So it's still £20 per person. All the research that's gone into it, which is 2 hours, and it's grown because originally it started off as an hour and a half tour, and now it's 2 hours. You
Hmm.
know, so last year was good, where I started seeing people from coming further out from places in London, Dubai, Thailand, Christchurch, 2 ladies from Melbourne, Australia, a chap from Perth, Western Australia. He originally came from Leytonstone. He was a photographer, and in his early days in Leytonstone, worked with the great David Bailey. So you meet all sorts of interesting people. And when I was on London Underground, you don't meet anybody interesting. You
No,
just
that's
drive
for
the
sure.
train A to B, and that's it. And yeah, so I tell about people about the locations. I take them down to where he was born, but obviously, like our local council, Tories greengrocers shot down 43 years ago, and now they've put a gas station there with a blue plaque. And I won't tell the viewers, but there's something wrong with that blue plaque.
Hmm.
And on the house next to it, you've got the murals of the birds. And there's something very special about one of those birds. I pointed it out to you. I don't think you
Yes.
noticed it first of all,
No, it's very
Um,
subtle.
yeah, and because
Hmm.
I said to you on the tour when it began, I said Alfred Hitchcock is still doing cameos in Leytonstone. Yeah,
That's right.
um, and I took you. You came down, and another location was the site of Southwell Grove, where Alfred Hitchcock in 1915 survived the Zeppelin raid. It was the heaviest on London. 500 houses bombed and damaged, 10 people killed, and it came right close down to the street he was living in. But he survived. But did Alfred Hitchcock serve in World War One? Well, you've got to come on the tour and find out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I have to agree as well that there was, very recently had read like I think it was Patrick McGilligan, I think that's his name. He wrote a biography called Alfred Hitchcock, A Life in Darkness and Light, which compared to some of the other biographies, like especially the one Donald Spoto, who wrote The Dark Side of Genius, it's a much more balanced view of Hitchcock. It sort of looks at sort of the good and the bad of Hitchcock and his personal life and so
Mhm.
forth. And there are so many things that I learned on your tour that I was not aware of. I mean, one of the biggest revelations to me was this one photo. I actually want to see if I can share my screen. I want to pull it up now. This one photo that people always assume is is actually it's not going to let me leave while I'm recording. That's too bad. But the one photo, it's on your website. We can maybe find a way to show it at the end. The one photo that for years of every Hitchcock documentary I've ever watched, every biography I've ever read, there's a
Mm.
photo of this boy on a horse next to Alfred Hitchcock's dad, and you assume
Mm.
that it's Alfred Hitchcock. Turns turns out it's not. It's actually
Turns
not
out
Alfred
it's not.
Hitchcock.
No, I found that out. I think about 2016, 2017. No, it was 2018 when I found out. I was doing a talk for the Alfred Hitchcock Society, the Birds Pub, and a guy called, I can't remember his name off the top of my head at the moment, but he said that photo, the original, is in the archives of the BFI. So he said, if you turn it around, it's the 21st of May, 1900. That makes Alfred Hitchcock 9 months old. They're actually, the reason it's Alfred Hitchcock's father, William, and he's done in khaki uniform. The boy on the horse is his brother, William. So at that time, his brother was 10 years old. And the girl in the right hand corner is his sister Nellie, who at that time was 8 years old. Alfred Hitchcock is 9 months old when that photograph's taken. The boy on the horse is definitely not Alfred Hitchcock. So the celebration that was going on, the reason why they were wearing khaki uniform is it was a relief of Mafeking during the Boer War. So Alfred Hitchcock was 9 months old. But I think a lot of biographers will say the boy on the horse is Alfred Hitchcock because it sells autobiographies, but it's not the truth. It's just something nice. It fits. It looks good. Yeah, but it's no.
Yeah,
I would
totally.
love to tell you that's. I would love to say, oh, the boy on the horse is Alfred Hitchcock. It isn't. I mean, I don't think there's any photographs of him. That the earliest photograph I've ever seen of Alfred Hitchcock is the one that was taken in 1919, where he's looking very young, very handsome. He's got a moustache.
Yeah.
That's probably the earliest photograph I've ever seen of a young Alfred Hitchcock. So that photograph was taken outside the original greengrocer's store that was there at 517 Leytonstone High Road, that his father ran from 1896 till 1907. And then the family left and moved to Limehouse. So that's where Alfred Hitchcock spent his early years. And then they moved to 175 Salmon Lane Limehouse. And then when his father died, they came back to Leytonstone again. So I'm not sure where they came back for the second time, but our great council, who don't care much for culture, history, 1980, I heard that they took a vote, and the shops then were boarded up. They'd been
Mhm.
disused for quite a while, and they just decided to tear it all down, and they turned Alfred Hitchcock's old greengrocers into a gas station, with
Mhm.
a blue plaque on it that is there's something wrong with that blue plaque. I know what it is, you know
Yes.
what it is, but
Oh, yes.
the public must come along to find out.
That's right. I mean, that's like, and the amount of people that use that gas station that walk by that blue plaque and don't think much of it, don't even bother to read it. Yeah,
Probably wouldn't
it's
even
such a
know.
shame.
Mm. I
Yeah.
mean, they have put on the house, the surviving house next door, where you got the murals of the birds, um, and the imprints of the birds within the pavement. You've got that there. Yeah. So, I mean, there are some relics of the past left down there. And as you know, on the tour, I take you down to Harrow Green and I show you the site of where the Harrow Green police station was, where in 1904 Alfred Hitchcock was taken. Well, he was sent down there by his father with a note for the desk sergeant, and he was put into jail for 5 minutes. And that was like an inspiration for his movies, The Injustice, because it's a common theme that you see in Hitchcock's film, the blonde, suspense, and the cops going after the wrong guy. It was always pretty predominant in these films, the injustice. And it's something that he always spoke about. Whoever interviewed him or you listen to him in his books, he's always talking about that incident that happened when he was 5 years old, a strict disciplinarian father.
Yeah, even the way that the police are portrayed in his movies, the police are not really, the harbingers of justice. They're not the people that come in and save the day. If anything, it's the wrong man wrongly accused of a crime that he
Mm,
didn't commit that ends up
mm,
clearing his name and saving the day and actually getting bringing the actual villains, the actual
Yeah.
criminals to justice. Like the police in his movies, there's always like this constant fear of the police. You look at that I
Yeah.
mean, Psycho's a great example of that. The look on I mean, the look on Janet Leigh's face, Marion Crane's face when she wakes up and there's a cop just staring
Yeah.
dead at her with the sunglasses
Looking
on, you
looking
know?
so evil. Look, because
Yeah.
it's Hitchcock. He's got a hatred of the police. It all stems back from that time he spent in jail as a young 5-year-old boy. It was only 5 minutes he spent in that jail, but that's maybe 2 minutes too long for a 5-year-old. You
Yeah,
know.
totally. Like 5 minutes is a very long time, especially if you're in such a frightening, unfamiliar situation. So yeah, I could imagine that that would really instill in him, and especially after he walks out and they tell him this is what we do to naughty little boys. That
Yeah.
completely, yeah, that would completely, I know that I've heard interviews with actually his granddaughter and I think his daughter as well, Pat Hitchcock, talking about how he really wasn't much of a driver. He didn't really drive. But even when if he was in a car with his driver and they got pulled over and the police were there, that he would actually be very frightened and shaking in his
Mm,
seat, even though he was just a
mm,
passenger. He wasn't the one that was driving. And so that
yeah.
fear of the police, that fear of I think that fear of sort of being wrongfully accused, despite your innocence and having to prove it in those sorts of circumstances, I think that stayed with him all throughout his life. I don't think he ever fully got over that. I think there was one
Yeah.
interview with him on the Dick Cavett show where he was talking about, he said, oh, they say that all you need to do to overcome your fears is to face them, to go to therapy and face them. And he said the whole thing is a pack of lies. And so I think it really
I think
stuck with
he said
him.
about counselling just wouldn't work for him. You know,
No, I don't think
but I
so.
know Hitchcock did own a driving license. He did have a driver's license, but very rarely known to drive because of that fear of the police. And it all stems back from that day when he was a 5-year-old. As you say, the state trooper, but in Hitchcock's movies, the hero is always the wrong guy they're going after. Cary Grant in North by Northwest and in films like Notorious and all these, the
Mhm.
39 Steps, one of his early.
Even the Lodger, like his first, like the Lodger's like often because he made a few movies before the Lodger, like maybe I think about two. He did the Pleasure Garden, and the Mountain Eagle, but the Lodger is really the first true Hitchcockian film. It's really the first true film where his themes are right out there in the open, and one of the major themes is the man wrongfully convicted because in the Lodger you have Ivor Novello who is suspected to be the Lodger killer, but he's actually trying to avenge the death of his sister by going after and finding the true killer. But of course, all the circumstantial evidence, the fact that he keeps newspaper clippings of the murders that are happening in London, and then he has all these other mysterious materials. I can't remember exactly what they have off the top of my head, but they all kind of point to his guilt, but he's really not guilty. He's just really trying to avenge the death of his sister. And so, yeah, that's echoed all
And,
throughout all kinds of films. As Hitchcock would say, self-plagiarism is style.
and something you were talking about there with the lodger, like the famous Hitchcock cameo. So that first happened in that movie, The Lodger, where he had two parts where he's answering a telephone with his back to the camera, and he's standing at the railings going like that. And they
That's
said,
right at
"Why
the
did
very
you
end.
appear? Why did you appear in the movie?" He said, "Because we ran out of actors." So that was the start of him being an extra, and he put himself in every movie after that, all the way up until Family Plot when he finally did his last movie in 1976. Always had a part in his film wherever he could get in. Lifeboat. You think how's he going to make a cameo in this, and he turns up in the newspaper. Or Dial M for Murder. This guy said, "Is me and Dickie and the chaps," and he's in the photograph.
He's in the
You
photograph,
know,
yeah. Yeah, he
or
was always
Rope
very
where it's a
creative
flash
with
mob.
his cameos for sure. Even in Rope, I know he's technically in Rope twice. There's that exterior shot of the Manhattan street, and you see there's some speculation as to whether or not it's him, but pretty certain it's him. There's like a high angle shot, and you see this figure walking alongside. I think it's a woman, and they're pretty sure that's Alfred Hitchcock. But his major cameo in that movie is he's like his profile
Flash
is
of
in the
neon sign. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
flashing red neon sign. Yeah, exactly. So he
yeah,
always found a way to get into them, even in his films like Lifeboat or Rear Window or Rope, where it was confined to a single setting.
yeah.
But yeah,
Mm.
great stuff. So I've been curious. You kind of got into this already. Like you were talking about some unique locations that are featured on the tour. Obviously, you don't want to give too much away. But I'm curious. how has the response been from Hitchcock fans and locals in the neighborhood once you got started and once it was off and running?
Um, I think the locals, they were interested. People in Leytonstone, generally, people in Leytonstone have not come on the tour. I haven't had too many people from Leytonstone. It's the surrounding areas, and a lot of the time it's like film buffs, people that really enjoy film and like the films of Alfred Hitchcock. Because I think I mean, every time, like as yourself, you came on the tour, and as they've been doing for the past 3 years, on and off. Every time I get a review, it's always 5 stars. I'm always getting 5 stars, and I always do the more research, the more that comes my way. Because when you came in it, I said that last year I discovered the church where his mother and father got married in 1896, and his Padot Church. I mean, they got married there in 1896, so I was surprised that the church was still there. It survived 2 world wars. And the nuns, when I told them, never had an idea that Alfred Hitchcock's parents were married there, you know. So it's all this research, keeps coming to hand. And when I said about there was a guy that he went to Mayville Road School, and a fella called Norman Jolliffe rang me up from Cambridgeshire, Wisbech, and he said that his father had gone to school with Alfred Hitchcock. And I said, "What did your father say about him?" And he said, "Shy, loner, kept himself to himself, very few friends." That's Hitchcock, And you think, why is all this information coming to me? You know, and it was like when I spoke, talked about that Harrow Green police station where Hitch was held as a young boy. I thought, was this true? But I've got a friend of mine called Gary Garner. He lives in Harlow in Essex. And he said he lived in that police station when it was just a normal apartment block. And he said, I lived upstairs. And he said, we were hearing these stories back in 1957. So this is not just recent. So when I hear like Barry Norman and Graham Alexander saying that Hitchcock said this, Hitchcock said that, I can pretty much rest assured it definitely must have happened. I wouldn't talk about something that was just a rumor.
Yeah, totally. That's great. Like it's amazing how, for you it started sort of as this passion that you had, and then it eventually snowballed into where it's a full-fledged tour. And like you were saying earlier, how your revenue is just like has just been increasing exponentially. And so that's great. I
Mm,
think it does appeal to it certainly does appeal to an international audience. I think especially a European audience and a North American audience as well, because
mm.
people can argue this all the time. Certainly Hitchcock's filmmaking skyrocketed once he went to the US. But I think a lot of his
Absolutely.
early British films are also really good too. I recently went to a screening of The Lady Vanishes here in
Mm,
here in Madrid, and it was incredible. I hadn't seen that movie in a long time, but and that's he at that point. But this is 1938 when he made The Lady Vanishes. He was just on the way out of leaving Britain and going to Hollywood. His last movie
mm.
in Britain at that time would have been Jamaica Inn in 1939.
Yeah.
But even as early as 1938, he really had a style down. And The Lady Vanishes, I think, along with the 39 Steps and I think Blackmail as well, is consistently ranked as one of the greatest British films of all time. And so I
Mm,
always tell people that are getting into Hitchcock, obviously they see the classic ones, Rear Window, Psycho, The Birds, North by Northwest, Vertigo. But I always tell people, go and watch his British films. That also gives you an
yeah.
idea of where his style came from. And I think in his British films as well, there's more of a they feel more not realistic, that's not the right word, but there's more of a realism to them, and it's a great capture of what life was like in London and Britain in general at that point in time, as opposed to the more sort of technicolor aesthetic of his later Hollywood period when he was very much, especially in the 50s, when he was very much in the throes of that studio system. But the 50s is also a very productive year for him in terms of his films. But I
Mm.
guess my next question for you would be, what do you enjoy the most about being a Hitchcock tour guide, or just being a
The
tour guide in
right.
general? I know it's not the only tour that you do.
Yeah. Well, I got two tours. Obviously, the main one is Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock, and the other one is the Blue Plaques of Leytonstone, where I go down to the Blue Plaques where we've got like David Bailey, Stuart Freeborn, the guy that created Yoda and Chewbacca in Star Wars, the House of David Beckham. and I end that tour at the house of Alfred Hitchcock. I love doing the Hitchcock tour because I'm the only one that's doing it. Nobody else bothered. Nobody's copying me. And it was like, it was my brainchild. I thought, I went round, I thought, right, this location, I'll add this, I'll add that, and then the proof was in the pudding. I went out on a few dummy runs with a few friends of mine, and a friend of mine, he said, I'm going to be honest with you. I said, what do you think? We're on a winner? He said, absolutely. He said, I'm super impressed with your knowledge. I said, are you? He said, well, you didn't look at any notes. I said, well, am I meant to? I thought, am I meant to look at notes? I thought, if I'm looking at notes, do I know my job? Walking around, let me think, let's have a look here. I've got it all up there. Somebody told me, a few people have told me that when they've done the tours, that you must have a photographic memory. I said, well, I thought everybody had a memory like this. But I thought I'd put it together. And the way I've put it together is I do it, though, because Alfred Hitchcock lived in Leytonstone twice. So the first part of the tour is 1899 to 1907. And then we get down to Southwell Grove and talk about the Zeppelin raid. We're dealing with the second half of his time in Leytonstone, that he lived there from 1914 to 1926. And as I said, where the Zeppelin raid happened, there were some houses that were blown down and then replaced with houses that were put up in the 60s. And most people think they were putting houses up in the 60s as a result of bombing during World War One. A lot of people are surprised. They thought it was bombing during World War Two. So what I enjoy is that I think it's a unique tour. I've put a lot of research into it. The research is still ongoing. I'm hoping that, my big hope is one day that some big film director like Spielberg turns up. That would be a dream, and some relatives maybe turn up of Alfred Hitchcock. I have met two of them. I said, I've heard on the phone that this woman called Betty Hitchcock, who lives in nearby Wanstead, has rung a couple of times saying she's coming. She hasn't turned up yet. And I met a woman about 5 years ago in London called Leslie Hitchcock. She was originally from San Francisco, saying she was a distant relative of Alfred Hitchcock and knew he came from London but didn't know where. So this is all revelations. And I think when you talk about the audience, a European and North American audience, I think North America is where it's going to be big for me. Canada, America, Australians are really interested. They love Hitchcock as well. When these two Australian women came on the tour a few months back, they said, they love my passion, and I put my heart and soul into this, and I have no bits of paper. I'm not qualified to do this. It's just like, it's my research. And some woman, there was a couple of women a few months ago, there was ex-school teachers, and they said, so what qualifications do you have? I said, none. I said, why? Do I need bits of paper? They said, and at the end, they said, well, you don't need bits of paper. You've got it all up there, So I'm passionate about this. I feel like I'm onto something here. I'm onto something big here. Sandra Shelby, if she wants to go ahead and charge £140 per person, fine, you do that. To me, it's a rip-off. And I think, like £20 per person, I think is a good deal. Obviously, the more popular it gets, then obviously we'll raise raise it as the years go on. But at the moment, the Britain and the Europe is not going through the best times financially. So let's make it affordable. Let's make it affordable and let's make it enjoyable. And in the summer months, I kind of like change things. Last summer, when we was having days of 35, 40-degree heat, I said, we'll take a break halfway round, get your water bottles out, ice lollies, ice cream, break for half an hour, and then we go again. Because I found out a couple of years earlier, I had some Australians and everybody was just going down with heat exhaustion. So you got to think about these things, Say like, when we're meeting at the cafe, get your water, get your sunblock, get your shades on, because people could sue you. They said, look, my wife's gone down with heat exhaustion. Well, the tour guide didn't say anything, So I love the Hitchcock tour because this is the birthplace of Alfred Hitchcock. I really want to put Leytonstone on the map. I think we've got so much going for us. And I can't believe in the area of Leytonstone where I live, there's no statue, there's no museum. But I said to you, down at Baker Street, they got a statue and a museum to a man that never existed. Alfred Hitchcock existed. Sherlock Holmes didn't. It was the brainchild of Arthur Conan Doyle, I think. I believe so anyway. But that's what I look forward to one day. I mean, the councillors around here in Leytonstone really don't care. They're not really all that bothered. They seem to be wanting to put up apartment blocks, but the apartment blocks they put up, they're going up with Hitchcock related names, as you saw. Topaz Court, Marnie Court, Hitchcock Business Estate, Paramount House. So the evidence is there all around, and people that have lived in the area and moved out. I had a couple, three people came on the tour. Two of them from Upminster, which is Essex, and they sent me a review saying we thought we knew the area well until we came on your tour. Obviously, we didn't know all this, So yeah, I'm a Leytonstone guy. I've been here 44 years, and I think it's about time the world knew about Alfred Hitchcock. Yes, he was a naturalized American, but this is where it began here. Born in Leytonstone, made in Leytonstone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and Leytonstone is also a very nice neighborhood, full of history, full of lots of activity. It's great. No, it was like when I was there, I was very impressed with it. And it's exactly to some degree, it's almost exactly how I would have pictured Hitchcock's neighborhood to have been, but I was also very surprised by it as well. That
Mm.
kind of leads me to my next question. What are some challenges that I mean, if any, that you experienced on the tour?
Mm. Challenges. I've had a few challenges. Last year, I had a woman ring me up called Eunice, and she said her and her boyfriend were coming along. He was a big film fan, and then they rang up saying, "Can two friends of ours come along as well?" And she said one of them's not quite well. Well, she didn't elaborate on when they said how unwell. The guy actually had COPD, so we were going along. He was breathing quite badly, shallow. So we took a break. And then at the end, Harrow Green, we just had to leave him behind. And I've talked to other tour guides about this, and they said, you get people coming along thinking they can conquer Everest, and they can't do it. And I think it was a couple of months before you came on the tour. I had 5 people come along, and one of them was an ex-school teacher. I can't remember her name. I think it was Helen. And she came from the nearby neighbourhood of Wanstead. And she said, I got Parkinson's disease, but she didn't tell me how severe it was. So she turned up, and her friends were holding her up as they were going round. And every time we got to a setting, a location, they sat her down on this fold-up chair. Now, I took a break halfway round just to let her catch her breath, and then she got halfway around and said, I can't do it anymore. So a friend of hers had to get her husband. They had to let her go home. And the other 3 came on the tour, rest of the tour with me. So sometimes people don't let on what kind of illness or injury or whatever. I mean, there was another woman from New Zealand who rung up, and she said, "Yeah, it's my boyfriend's birthday. I want to bring him on the Hitchcock tour." So they say, "Oh, we're going to be." I thought she said she's going to bring her granddaughter along, and it turns out she turns up and had the little girl in a pushchair. So they were going around with a pushchair, and then they put the baby into a baby carrier. So that was okay, But the other 2, sometimes people don't let on that they might have an injury or an illness. So that's challenging when somebody turns up. I mean, as the tour starts to grow and you get bigger and bigger tours, you got to face the day when you say we've got to leave these guys behind, because you wasn't completely honest about your level of injury or your level of illness. Because when that woman bowed out halfway round, I saw her friend a few weeks later. She said, "Oh, we want to come on your Blue Plaques tour now." I said, "That one's 2 hours of walking and we're going up hills." I said, "I can't allow it. I don't think my public liability insurance would cover it anyway. So if she took a trip or a fall, I'm liable." And I thought, I've worked too hard to throw this all away, So there's some of the things, but the public will ask crazy questions. I mean, last year, I think at the start of it, I was charging like £15 at the start of the year. And this woman said, "And what else do we get?" Thinking like, what we're going to get. Are we going to get dinner at the Alfred Hitchcock Hotel later, thrown in? And I thought, well, what do you want for £15? You're getting expert research and advice here. I'm telling you about what the area was like. She did come on it, but as I said, she brought her boyfriend along plus a friend that had COPD. So these are the things, the challenges that you face, is that they don't always disclose what the illness or the injury might be because they want to go on that Alfred Hitchcock tour, you know?
Yeah, totally. And that would be difficult on any tour to accommodate um people's, different needs and their capabilities and so forth. And especially when, like as you were saying, if they don't tell you that in the beginning, then how are you supposed to accommodate it? Because I think I would imagine obviously like if someone can't physically walk that then makes it difficult, but there are certainly, even if someone can't physically walk, there are ways around that. There
Mm.
are ways that maybe they can bring a wheelchair, maybe they can do some way to accommodate so that they can still enjoy the tour. um yeah, that's great. That makes a whole lot of sense how you would encounter those types of challenges. I'm wondering, do you have any future plans upcoming, anything upcoming for Hitchcock Talks and Tours? Any talks, any more, anything you want to
Mm.
add to the tour? Anything that you're kind of planning that's developing?
I haven't got any more plans for the tours. I mean, I got the two tours, the Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock and the Blue Plaques. I've got six talks, and I've got plans for two more. So my six talks is Hitchcock's Leytonstone, Psycho at 60, Famous People of Leyton and Leytonstone, where I talk about the actors like Derek Jacobi, Steve Harris, who came from Leytonstone, bass guitarist of Iron Maiden. Um, that one. David Beckham also came from Leytonstone. I got another one called Stories from the City of London, the City of London Cemetery in Manor Park. That has got Bobby Moore, the Elephant Man's there, and two victims of Jack the Ripper, plus two Victoria Cross winners, you know. And then I got another cemetery called the East London Cemetery. I call it Tales from the East Side, where they've got a bloke called Morris Wagg. He won the American Congressional Medal of Honor during the American Civil War in 1865. He saved a load of men that were drowning on the USS Arizona and didn't settle in the US after the war and went back to London. And he died in 1926, and the English buried him in a pauper's grave. And then the United States military were informed in 2015, and they gave him a burial with full military honors. So these are the things that you don't normally see, you know, that I wanted to do. And that was covered in Tales from the East Side. I've done another one called Water Toll Request Denied. A chap, he was the first black officer in the British Army. He got his commission in May 1917, and he was recommended for the Military Cross on New Year's Eve 1917. He led 60 men across the Piave River on the Italian front, and his commanding officer recommended him for the Military Cross. And because he was black, it wasn't awarded. And to this day, it's never been awarded, you know. So I've done that too, but I've got plans for two more. I've got a few books, and this is an idea that I've talked about Hitchcock and his time in Leytonstone. I want to do one now called Hitchcock: The Hollywood Years. So, you know, when he goes over to California in 1939 on the Queen Mary, and he signs that 7-year deal with David O. Selznick. And I think they only made two pictures together, those guys. You know, Rebecca was the first one. I think Paradigm Case was the last one. And then they were loaning him out to other film companies, you know. And then he had Transatlantic Pictures and Columbia, Paramount, and those 5 Oscar nominations that he got for Best Director that were never won, you know. So that's a one I got an idea for, Hitchcock: The Hollywood Years. I've had it in my mind for a couple of years now. And also another one I want to do called St. Patrick's 1868. So the local St. Patrick's Cemetery, where there's 3 family plots to Alfred Hitchcock. But you've also got the last victim of Jack the Ripper, Mary Kelly, there. And what people don't know, in 1987, I was a postman around there, and they filmed a movie called A Prayer for the Dying. Bob Hoskins and Mickey Rourke was in. Mickey Rourke played an IRA gunman, and a local man brought it to the attention of Mickey Rourke that this woman has no known grave, and Mickey Rourke paid for the gravestone. You know, it's still, and I thought, I think the world needs to know about this. So those are 2 plans that I've got, you know, for future talks, like, you know. So apart from that, it's just business as usual, you know. Hopefully in about March or next month, things will start picking up again. But it's all quiet on the Western Front at the moment, you know, because the weather isn't so great here. I mean, I think we're getting, every morning it's frost, and we're getting up in the morning with, it might be like 5 degrees, and in the evening it gets to -2. So
Mm.
nobody's really up for a tour at the moment. So I'm hoping like March onwards. And what I really love to see this year is like the Canadians, the Americans, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Europeans. I would love to see them. I want people to know that in the East End of London, it just isn't Jack the Ripper tours. You know, we've got. I want to be the. You know, I want to let people know there's another tour. I mean, because I know you did my tour, and you
Hmm.
did the Jack the Ripper tour, and when my friends came over from Melbourne, Australia, they came on my tour and they went on the Jack the Ripper tour, and I said, which one did you enjoy the best? They said, we enjoyed yours. You know, so I thought, well, you know, that's pleasing to hear. So it keeps me motivated, keeps me on my toes, thinking, you know, I've had a few times over the last year or so thinking, well, let's fold it all up, let's call it a day, and let's just go and work at the local supermarket stacking shelves. But I think there's something spurring me on. And I said, when I had that dream a couple of weeks ago, that Alfred Hitchcock was sitting in my front living room, and I could remember it really well. I thought, well, I think maybe Alfred's watching over and wants me to carry on the good work, like, you know, keep his memory alive, as it were, like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I hope that this podcast, this YouTube interview, helps as well to spread the word out there as well. I mean, it was such a pleasure to meet you and to, I think also just to talk to someone because I find that at least amongst sort of my age group, certainly being interested in the film of Alfred Hitchcock, and even I think to some degree just film in general, it's a very niche interest, and so there's not a whole, at least living obviously in a different country than my own country. It's a very niche interest, and there's not as many people to really talk and obsess over to the same degree. So I think meeting you is also, I think for me, also was a great sign in terms of just living here in Europe and being away from North America. And I hope it's the same for your tour. And like I said, I hope that this podcast, this YouTube interview, continues to get the word out there. My final question for you is: do you have a favorite Alfred Hitchcock film, or what films stick out in your mind when you think of Alfred Hitchcock, and why?
Three films. And I mean, North by Northwest is a favourite of mine. You know, Cary Grant, and because I was a train driver, they said it a lot of it on a train. You know, story of a twist, the cops going after the wrong guy. Love that movie. You know, really love that movie. And Eva Marie Saint. You know, I think it was the only film that she appeared in of Alfred Hitchcock. So it showed, you know, when Hitchcock lost Grace Kelly as his main blonde, and then he brought people worse than like Eva Marie Saint. She played a great part in it, and Alfred and how Cary Grant went into different disguises to escape from the police, you know, and then it's all set. Where is it? The Mount Rushmore at the end with the presidents, you know, great scene. Yeah, and James Mason playing a baddie, you know, that was great. And I later found out about James Mason that during the war, he was a conscientious objector. He never served, you know, so that was interesting what I found out about James Mason. That's my third favourite. My second favourite is Spellbound. You know, I love the dream sequence with Salvador Dali. Um, Gregory Peck is now there's problems with his mind, obviously, like shell shocked from World War II, and the workings of the mind, you know, and that dream sequence that Salvador Dali was brought in for, and where he takes a glass of water and suddenly like everything goes dark, you know, great special effects movie, Spellbound. I really enjoyed that. But my all-time favorite, without a shadow of a doubt, is Psycho, because you know it's a great movie because he made it on such a budget. You know, Paramount weren't going to finance it; they thought he was out of his mind putting this Stephen Block novel to film. You know, they said you know he's had some great success with Vertigo, North by Northwest. Now he wants to follow it up with this like horror, you know, movie. But I mean, he put $800,000 into that movie, every penny he owned, and he made 10 million. You know, and it was groundbreaking because who up until then has said we're going to kill the leading lady off halfway through, and that's what he was going to do with Janet Leigh. You know, but the genius of Hitchcock, right, is that he kills off Janet Leigh and then he brings in Vera Miles, so you get two leading ladies for the price of one. You know, nobody really knew who Milton Arbogast was. You know, Martin Balsam, but then he started to make it. You know, he'd been in 12 Angry Men prior to that. Alfred Hitchcock's daughter was brought in, and he used the film crew from the Alfred Hitchcock Presents series. You know, Psycho. You know, the shower scene. Obviously, it doesn't scare me now because I've seen it so often. But it was groundbreaking. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock did a lot of groundbreaking movies. You know, when you look at Blackmail, that was the first talkie in Great Britain. And then Rope, he deals with homosexuality. Um, yeah, so and then obviously, Psycho, he's dealing with horror here, and but I always like the original. I've never wanted to watch the Gus Van Sant movie that was made in 1998. I just don't think you can remake classics. I don't think they could ever make Gone with the Wind or nothing like that. And I don't think, I mean, I know they made a remake of Rebecca, but I watched it. It was okay, but you can't beat the real thing. So those are my three favorite movies. I think Psycho was his best movie. I mean, it made him a rich man. I mean, what he made like $10 million, which in 1960 is an absolute fortune. He could have retired then, but then he made The Birds 3 years later, and I thought Marnie was a great film. When you
I
when
thought
you
so
think
too.
about, I mean, that film. I mean, Sean Connery was big. He'd made a few James Bond movies, and Tippi Hedren had made a name for herself in The Birds. And I don't understand why that film flopped. I can understand it with Torn Curtain and Topaz because I don't think they were great movies, films that he
Hmm.
probably shouldn't have made. But then I think he got back on track with Frenzy when he came back to London, back to
Definitely.
the roots, his roots. I've never seen Family Plot, but those are my three favourites, and I would say if it comes to a British favourite, it's the 39 Steps,
Yeah.
when they go into the theatre and the Memory Man and what are the 39 Steps. I think for me, that was the best of his British movies. You were talking about The Lady Vanishes. It is a unique film because it was all set on a train,
Yeah.
and Jamaica Inn didn't do it for me, didn't do it for me. But it's always hit and miss. He made some great movies. He made some not so great movies, but the thing is, I mean, Hitchcock died, how many, 43 years ago, and we're still talking
Hmm.
about him today. The guy's a legend, no
Yeah,
doubts about it.
absolutely. And even like Hitchcock's like second rate films or his inferior films are still very interesting to watch because it's him, because it's so uniquely him. And yeah, I agree. Like there's definitely like I would say of all the movies he made, I'd say like almost all of them, you can find even the ones that are less enjoyable, you can kind of find something in them that kind of pulls you in. Because I think that's just the kind of artist that he was.
Mm.
Yeah, is there any information as we wrap things up? Is there any information that you wanted to relay to the YouTube audience about the Hitchcock Talks and Tours? Anything you want them to know? In the description, we'll put your the website and any other relevant information for people to check out. But is there anything that you'd like to say? Any final words?
Final words. Well, I'd like to say any Canadians or Americans coming to London, I'm available. Get on my website, hitchcocktalksandtours.com. And I said, I'm far more cheaper than Sandra Shelby. And I think I'm on an even keel with Jack the Ripper. You know, I mean, he is a fascinating guy, Jack the Ripper. I mean, in the last 134 years, they've drawn up 140 suspects, and we're still no closer to catching him. You know, but yeah, I mean, I do my Hitchcock tour. My Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock goes 5 times a week, and I say reasonably priced at £20 per person. The prices have been held over from last year, so you know, love to see Canadians and Americans. Hopefully so. Yes, I'll leave it there. Can't say any more. That's a wrap.
Yeah, fantastic. Gary Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today on this installment of Novel Conversations. As I said, we'll put the information about the Hitchcock Talks and Tours down below. I've been on the tour myself. I think if you're even if you're not a big Hitchcock fan, if you're just a film buff or you're curious about the neighborhood of Leytonstone, or you're just looking for something to do in London that's not a Jack the Ripper tour, then I would highly recommend checking out Gary Lewis's Hitchcock, Walking in the Footsteps of Hitchcock in Leytonstone, London. Gary, thank you so much. And I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me today.
Okay.